We said coming in that the Giants needed to sweep this series against the San Diego Padres in order to stay alive with any kind of hope for making the postseason this year. What happened? The Giants got swept, and in my opinion, even though they're not mathematically eliminated, the season is over. So we're going to break down what that means next.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily San Francisco Giants podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to Locked On Giants, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. My name is Ben Kaspick, and on this show we provide daily episodes Monday through Friday, talking about the San Francisco Giants in a way that's data-driven and rational, but also simple, passionate, and accessible to all. I'm a former contributor for the baseball statistics and analysis websites Beyond the Box Score and Rotographs. I've been podcasting about the Giants since 2015, and I'm a lifelong fan. Thank you for making Locked On Giants your first listen every day. We're free and available wherever you get podcasts. Today's episode is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline, where the game starts. And where we start is talking about how the season is over for the San Francisco Giants. They needed to sweep, in my opinion, to stay alive in this wild card race. With a sweep, they would have been as few as 4.5 games back. It could have been more if the Brewers had overtaken the Padres and the Brewers had kept winning. But instead, here's the thing. Even if the Giants had won 2 out of 3, they wouldn't have been 5.5 back. They would have been 6.5 back. So a sweep, 4.5 maybe, and 2 out of 3 wins, 6.5. 2 out of 3 losses, 8.5, and a sweep by the Padres, 10.5. And that's what happened. The Giants get swept here. They've lost 7 straight games. They're 61-68. They're 10.5 back. The Arizona Diamondbacks are ahead of the San Francisco Giants in the standings, which, by the way, I've seen a lot of people dunking on the Giants like that's some huge deal that such a terrible team like the D-backs. They were bad last year. They lost 110 games. But the D-backs have some really young and exciting young talent. So I just have to say, not only is it not surprising at this point, we've seen how tough the D-backs have been on the Giants this year. They've been a thorn in their side. But also, I would trade the Giants roster for the D-backs roster in a heartbeat because they just called up a guy who may be the number 1 prospect in the game, Corbin Carroll. They've got Dalton Varsho. They've got Alec Thomas. They've got many other, Jake McCarthy, just Zach Gallen. They've got a lot of talent on that team, and the Giants don't really have that. And it's kind of a crazy turn of events because last year, obviously, you have some talent on your way to 107 wins. Whether it's overperformance or not, guys were playing like talented players. And this year, they've just not played that way all season long for the most part. They started out the year 13-5. And since then, they're 48-63 over 111 game span. Their run differential over that point in time or over that span is about -50. And I believe the note prior to today's game, going off of memory, I think it was saying the Giants were 24-40 since that walk-off loss to the Pittsburgh Pirates, the day that Jack Suwinski hit 3 home runs and the Giants were going for the sweep. And instead, they couldn't win that final game despite having a lead. And then the next day, they started that road series in Atlanta, a 4-game series, and they could have won all 4, or at least 3 out of 4. And they ended up losing 3 out of 4. But since that Pirates walk-off loss, prior to Wednesday's loss to the Padres, the Giants were 24-40, the 3rd worst record in Major League Baseball. So another loss would make them, obviously, they're now 24-41, starting with that loss to the Pirates. So that is terrible baseball over the span of 65 games. So as miraculous and uplifting as 2021 was, 2022, particularly in the last couple of months, has been almost just as bad. And it is just the state of the team is just not in a good place. And something I want to get into more tomorrow is looking at this piece that was written by Kylie McDaniel over at Fangraphs. McDaniel is a former analyst for Fangraphs, a prospect analyst, and also he's worked for 4 different organizations. I really respect and enjoy reading and watching and listening to Kiley McDaniel, and he wrote this piece for ESPN today ranking the cores of all 30 teams, considering guys who are locked up through at least 2024, including relevant prospects. And the Giants, just to give you a little teaser, come in at number 28 out of 30 on that list. And I think that it's completely justified. And in fact, as others have pointed out, you can make a case that the teams that are below the Giants are actually, they could be above the Giants. The Giants really could be 30th out of 30 in terms of a core of talent. And this, like, you've got Logan Webb, you've got your Marco Luciano and Kyle Harrison type prospects. But besides that, there's just really not that much here. And that's really been the downfall this season, is they're just not getting above average, like really good production out of almost anybody except Logan Webb and Carlos Rodon. On the position player side, there's nobody who I would say is like significantly better than the league average player. They have some guys who are significantly better as a hitter, but then they don't provide a lot of defensive value, or they're in a platoon and they don't provide a lot of defensive value. So just the overall player is just not a very good player. They might be competent in some ways, but they're just not a difference maker, and their record reflects that. And so they've been outscored on the season. For the longest time, they had a positive run differential going, but 7 games under 500, you typically expect that you have been outscored on the season. So they have underperformed their run differential. They've only been outscored by 5 runs on the season, and yet they're 7 games under 500. So you could call that a little bit of misfortune. But look, we're way past the point of attributing this season to misfortune. It's just not a very good roster, and they're going to have some serious soul searching to do in the offseason and looking at what went wrong, why it went wrong, what processes were wrong, and also just flat out getting better players into the organization, because this product is basically unacceptable. It's not like they've just been hovering around 500 all year. Like I said, 24-41 over the last 2 months is just not acceptable for this franchise right now, in my opinion. So one of the big issues has been the bullpen, and coming up in just a minute, I want to talk about the bullpen a little bit. It's something we haven't gotten into much this year, but it's important when we start thinking about next year, because they're starting to audition some new guys. So we'll talk about who's underperformed, who they might move on from, and then some of these new faces that are getting a look here in the last month of the season. But first, betonline.net is your number one source for all your pro and college football betting needs and sports info this season. Find all the latest football league developments, game matchups, news, and podcasts, including this year's opening week's games. BetOnline is also your continued source for all your sporting wagering information, including live betting, esports, and scores. The fastest and easiest way to check in on all your favorite sports and events, including MMA, MLB, boxing, and golf. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and action. BetOnline, where the game starts. All right, as promised, let's get into the bullpen a little bit. It's been a problem. It's been a problem recently. When I look at the rankings on Fangraphs, if you just pull up team relief pitcher stats, you're going to find the Giants at the bottom of the list. This list is sorted by wins above replacement, which is kind of famously not a great way to evaluate relievers. So we'll give them the benefit of the doubt a little bit and start by searching for team earned run average by their relievers. And here we find the Giants are 23rd out of 30 teams with a 4.24 earned run average by their relievers. The top team in the NL, no surprise, the Los Angeles Dodgers, who, let's just be frank about it, they are a better run organization than the Giants by a mile right now. And they were prior to Zaidi leaving the Dodgers and coming to the Giants, and they are today as we approach the end of 4 full years since Farhan Zaidi was hired. And so while I continue to believe in Farhan Zaidi, and I think you don't fluke your way into what they did last year, and I believe with some changes in philosophy and with maybe some of the young talent finally starting to show up perhaps next year, things could look a lot better. But that being said, just objectively, we're almost 4 full years into this front office, and to have the type of season that they're having, they would certainly classify it as a major disappointment. I don't think I'm being controversial here by saying it's majorly disappointing how this season has gone. And when you compare them to the Dodgers, I would have thought that by the end of the fourth year, and to be fair, I know it doesn't, I don't want it to sound like an excuse, but it's just a note. It's worth pointing out. 2020 was not a normal year. And so it's not four normal years. It's more like three. And I mean, it's like 3+ because there was no minor league season. But at the same time, every team was affected by that, including the Dodgers. And the Dodgers have never had high draft picks because they're always finishing at the top of the league and they pick at the end of every round. So it's not an excuse. And so the gap between the Dodgers and the Giants, even though there was no gap on the major league level last year, the Giants went toe-to-toe with LA all season long and ultimately edged them for the division title. Obviously lost in the playoffs, but still, just like that year looks like the aberration when we look at how the last 4 seasons under Farhan Zaidi have gone. 2019, total pass because it was year one, and actually there were some bright spots. Mike Yastrzemski's emergence was a bright spot that year. 2020, they were more competitive than people thought they would be, even though it was a short season, and they really hit. There was a big offensive improvement from 2019 to 2020. 2021, they obviously won 107 games. And so you could easily look at last year and say, things are fantastic, things are great, they're doing a great job. So I don't want to get too much recency bias here. But when we just kind of look at the state of the organization today, it's hard not to say that they're not in a particularly good place, and that 2021, because 2020 they were below 500, 2019 they were below 500, this year they're probably going to end up below 500. So to have only one above 500 year, even though it was so great, is undoubtedly a disappointment. But I got off track there. The point is the bullpen, where the Giants rate at a 4.24 ERA. Now, as with, I believe, the starting rotation, the ERA is being the ERA is worse than the peripherals suggest, meaning to me, it looks like the defense has cost them in terms of run prevention this year. It hasn't been so much of a thing, although they did have a 4-error game in the second game of this series. So it has come up, certainly, but the defense has not really been the problem lately. It's more just like the pitching, the bullpen, and just kind of giving up too many runs. And then the offense has been in a major funk. And in this series, they fought back like every time and had a shot late in the game, but just couldn't seal the deal. But regardless, when I see these inflated ERAs and the better peripheral numbers across the board for the Giants this year, I think, okay, a lot of that probably has to do with the fact that they just didn't have a good defensive year at all. They've been one of the worst defensive teams in the game. By outs above average, they're tied for 29th with or 28th. 28th and 29th spots are a tie between the Phillies and the Giants at minus 27 outs above average. So, though, when we look at the individual performers for the Giants in the bullpen, it's a whole lot of meh, like even their best relievers. Like we can look at Camilo Doval. The sinker development has been one of the better stories of the year, which tells you there haven't been that many good stories, because even with the new sinker, which has at times looked like a pitch that unlocks the whole arsenal for Doval, he still has command issues. And in fact, recently especially, and then in one of those games in Minnesota, walks by Camilo Doval essentially cost him the game, and Dominic Leone as well. But for Doval, you've got all the tools there, but he still hasn't quite put it all together, and the walk rate has taken a step back this year and is worse than the major league average. So that's one of your better stories of the year, and it's still not that great. And then with John Brebbia, he's been one of their better and one of the most often used relievers in the game this season, which, by the way, just goes to show you the difference a year can make with relievers. And this is like largely the same bullpen as last year when they led the league in ERA. And this year, whatever I said, 24th. And so it just goes to show you next year they could have a great season, and it could be a lot of the same guys. Like, a lot of people had their pitchforks in hands, and they were ready. They were coming at me when I was defending John Brebbia last season. But this year, he's arguably been their best reliever. And so that just, again, it just goes to show you a lot of these guys can be brought back next year. And so they're going to have some very interesting decisions to make. But let's just talk next about a guy like Tyler Rogers. Rogers last year had a 2.22 earned run average, was extremely reliable. We just kept talking about how he was impossible to do damage against. You just didn't see a lot of damaging contact against Tyler Rogers. The funky arm angle, it was hard to do much. If you were getting hits, they were singles. But he's given up, I think, 3 home runs on the year, 3 or 4. 3 home runs on the year. I believe 2 were walk-off home runs. I could be misremembering that, but they've all been big homers, including one the other day. But this year, following up the 2.22 ERA, Rogers has more than doubled that to 4.58. And so the peripherals are solid, but still, it's just another example of a guy who was good for them last year who's just not been good for them this year. And he can be brought back next year, and I think he will be, but there are some guys who probably won't, and we'll get into those guys in a minute. Dom Leone is a guy who I don't think will be back. He is actually going to reach free agency at the end of the year. So it's a really bad time for him to be struggling like he has been. But after having a 1.51 ERA over 53 and 2/3 innings last year, he's got a 4.11 this year. That was prior to today. He did pitch today. I think it was a scoreless inning. So that went down a little bit. Again, peripherals are a little bit better, suggesting an ERA maybe in the high 3s as opposed to low 4s, but that's not that much better. Maybe mid to high 3s as opposed to low 4s. But still, the command has been a problem. It's actually the same exact type of walk rate as last year, a little over 10%. Last year was exactly 10%. But that's just Dom Leone. But he's had some stretches where he just can't throw a strike. And it has caught up to them in the worst moments. Like, Dom Leone just could not throw a strike in extra innings, and he walked in the winning run. He walked a guy, they intentionally walked a guy to load the bases, and then he walked in the winning run, all without getting an out. So that just goes to show you. But with these guys, they're turning the page on some others. We've also seen, like, for example, Jake McGee and the blow-ups he had after being so good last year with a 2.72 ERA. This year with the Giants was just horrendous, and they ended up having to DFA him. But what I'm most interested in is these future pieces. Some guys they're giving a look to here as the season somewhat winds down. Alex Young, Scott Alexander. So I want to get into their performance and if they might be back next year, and why watching them down the stretch is actually an important part of the season for the rest of the way when we're thinking about 2023. So more about those guys in just a second. But first, all right, as promised, I want to get into these new relievers who have kind of been auditioning for the San Francisco Giants over the last few weeks. We've seen quite a bit of Alex Young. We've seen Thomas Szapucki make his Giants debut. And most recently, we've seen Scott Alexander. So Alex Young, when I look at the numbers, he's not exactly a guy whose performance jumps off the page, but he's actually been pretty effective, giving up 4 runs in 12 and 2/3 innings. This is counting today. 2.84 ERA and a 3.05 fielding independent pitching. But fielding independent pitching counts home run rate. He hasn't allowed a homer, and so that's why we use something like xFIP, because it presumes a normal home run rate. Since home run rate is kind of something that doesn't stabilize quickly at all, it's saying if you had a normal rate of home runs on your fly balls, then this is what your FIP would be. And the FIP is suggesting this is what your ERA would be if you took out kind of the randomness of balls in play. So that's like a really basic way of looking at it, but that number is worse. And so I don't know, he's been kind of steady, and he's just a new arm, and he is a guy who is under club control and can be optioned moving forward and is pre-arbitration eligible. I think he might reach first-year arbitration eligibility this season. Actually, maybe not. I'm not entirely sure, but he is under club control and can be brought back next year And these type of guys are important in the last month of the year because they've had a bullpen that has struggled so much. I think they need to have some turnover, and a guy like Alex Young could be a part of that turnover. Another guy I'm very intrigued by actually is Scott Alexander, who's now pitched in 3 games for the Giants this year, 3 1/3 innings, including today, hasn't allowed a run and hasn't issued a walk, has gotten a ground ball rate of 87.5%, which is his calling card. He actually has a career ground ball rate of 70%. League average is closer to 40. It's like in the low 40s. And he, in his career, in 207 1/3 innings before today, so 208 1/3 now, has that 70.2% ground ball rate. The average launch angle against him, negative 3.5%. So to me, this is like the most intriguing guy of all. And that's the thing. I want to make it clear that bullpens are the least exciting part of a team, in my opinion, and the most volatile. And as we saw, you can have a very good one year, bring back pretty much everybody, and be one of the worst the next year. It can happen that way. You could go out and make a big signing of a reliever, but we've seen Mark Melancon. It does not always work out. He wasn't very good for the Giants. He was good before. He's kind of been good after. Well, I don't think overall he's been good this year, but he's had some success later on after he left the Giants. And it just goes to show you it's volatile. And so when we're talking about, Scott Alexander, it's not a foundational piece. It's more like, can they have a more competent bullpen for September and maybe for next year? They better, because it's hard to win when you have a bad bullpen. It makes things a lot tougher for you. And if you have a good bullpen, likewise, it makes the game a lot less stressful and a lot more easy. And you win the games you're supposed to win. And it's just a better way to live, to have a good bullpen. So that is why I care about a guy like Scott Alexander. I'm actually not entirely clear if he can be brought back next year, because he only had 5 years and 39 days of service time entering this season, but he was on a minor league deal with the Giants because he was rehabbing an injury. That's how the Giants picked this guy up, was they signed him to a minor league deal coming off an injury. He's pitched a lot in his career, as I said, over 200 innings with the Royals and with the Dodgers. So at 5 years and 39 days, you need a full 6 years, I believe, to get to free agency. And so they just added him to the 40-man. I don't think he's not going to get to 6 years. So I do believe he's a guy who can be brought back next year, and it would be his final year of arbitration eligibility. That is my understanding. I need to clarify on that, but I think that would make sense as to why they're trying him out now. So this would be an important month for him if that is the case. A couple of other guys, you're probably going to see Junior Marte, apparently, according to Gabe Kapler, in the last month of the season. That was part of the disappointment of saying they don't have these exciting, their core is just not very good, that we'll talk more about tomorrow. But they don't have these exciting guys they can call up when rosters expand on September 1st, which is tomorrow. So the next game the Giants play, they'll get 2 more roster spots, and they'll keep that the rest of the way. But Kapler said, we might see Junior Marte and David Villar. So it's okay, Junior Marte, he's got a 6.15 ERA this year. We've seen him. He can be good looking at times. He can look good at times, I should say, but also the results just haven't been there. But important, if you believe in him and that he can be better than that, probably important to give him a look in the last month of the year. So that kind of sums that up. A lot of the guys they have can be brought back next year, but I think that you're going to see a lot of turnover because they have not been very good, and they need to change not just their pen, but their roster in general. So that is all the time we have for today. Thanks again for making Locked On Giants your first listen every day. Now make your second listen the Ultimate Pro Football Preview 2022, an 8-episode extravaganza to get you ready for the NFL season. The local team experts of the Locked On Podcast Network, plus a betting angle from Lee Sterling of Locked On Bets, all combining into one ultimate NFL preview. Search for Ultimate Pro Football Preview 2022 on your Odyssey app, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. Once again, my name is Ben Kaspick. Check me out on Twitter at Ben Kaspick, Kaspick. If you like this show, do me a solid and what was I going to say? Hit that subscribe button. Tell your friends and family to check us out, and also leave a review if it wouldn't be too inconvenient for you. I would really appreciate it. So thanks in advance, and thank you to everyone who's done so already. I can't wait to be with you again tomorrow talking about that. Which teams have the best cores and why the Giants rank 28th. So we're going to get into that and how they can fix it tomorrow. So thanks again for listening. You are now Locked On Giants.